Welcome to the Book of Mormon Evidence Podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is Lesson 48, Moroni 7 through 9. May Christ lift thee up. This is part 3 of Palmyra Legacy with Lori Bean Henderson. Willard and Rebecca Bean have gained much attention over the years with awesome praise and adoration. Granddaughter Lori Bean Henderson has shared the inspiring true story of their extraordinary 24-year mission in Palmyra, New York, the longest mission in the history of the church. Their story is an example of how the Lord can take an ordinary man and prepare him for an extraordinary purpose. Willard was a kind man, a humble man, a man with deep passion for the gospel and an astounding knowledge of the scriptures. He was a man of great wit and genuine humor, a writer, an actor, and a comedian. He was the first member of the church to do real research into evidences of the Book of Mormon in the Great Lakes region. He was a distinguished speaker and theologian, a defender of truth. He was active in community service in Palmyra, even a leader of the community organizations. Rebecca was the epitome of charity, of loving kindness, always engaged in service to God in the church and in the community. Together they raised their family to be patient, tolerant, and kind in a hostile environment. Their unshakable testimonies, extraordinary courage, faith, and reliance on the sustaining power of the Savior, and their love unfeigned for everyone, is inspiring and empowering for all. The Palmyra Legacy neither begins nor ends with this exceptional couple. There is much more to be appreciated as the history of Palmyra unfolds.
So this is the place of the final battles. Here between these hills, both the Jaredites and Nephites were destroyed. That's from letter 7. That is the hill Cumorah. And this is Jonathan Neville. He made a couple of hats.
I have one.
I didn't know for sure if you had one, so I just happened to bring a couple of hats. So this is, I thought this would match.
I would like a white. I have a red one.
You have a white. Okay, so you want to put these on here?
Sure.
Okay, so here we go. Okay, so I know some of you may be thinking these are MAGA hats. MAGA hats. So anyway, so make Cumorah great again. All right, now the last couple of things there. Hey, it looks good on you. There we go. That's pretty good. All right. So a couple of pages that you need to know about in the annotated Book of Mormon that has to do with this. Page 441 talks about where's the hill Cumorah, speculation about the hill Cumorah and its geography. This has some different quotes here from Joseph Fielding Smith that are just fantastic. The next page over talks about the celebration of the purchase of the hill Cumorah, September 21st to the 23rd of 1828. This is the hill Cumorah by President Anthony W. Ivins.
This is 1928.
Excuse me, 1928. Did I say 18? Sorry about that. So 1928, and this is just phenomenal stuff. So, but you actually have brought with you some video of this dedication, right? I mean, is that what you have?
Ours is the dedication of the Moroni Monument.
Of the Moroni Monument, okay, but not the purchase of the hill, okay. No. But this has got some great stuff in it, folks. Let me see. Again, if you go to the book, it says, this is from President Anthony W. Ivins, who was, by the way, he was born on September 16th, 1852 at the Toms River in New Jersey, served in Mexico from 1882 to 1907. He was ordained an apostle in 1907 by President Joseph F. Smith. He was sustained as a second council in the first presidency in 1921 at the age of 68 and sustained his first council in the first presidency in 1925 at the age of 72. Died in Salt Lake City. In the April 1828 General Conference, President Ivins said that the purchase of the hill Cumorah, quote, seems to have been providential, in the conference report there. But this is what he also said here. So this is from the address given at the 98th Annual General Conference, April 6, 1928. The hill Cumorah, this is also printed in the improvement era, again also in 1928, says, there has been some differences of opinion in regard to it, and in order that I might be correct in the statements which I make, I have this morning finished a short manuscript which I would like to read for the first time. I believe in my experience that I have ever addressed a congregation in this manner, and I do it for the purpose stated. The purchase of this hill, which President Grant has announced, is an event of more than ordinary importance to the membership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The memories of the remote past which cluster around this sacred spot, its close association with the opening of the present gospel dispensation, which has resulted in bringing together this congregation of people. For without this, tabernacle would not have been erected, nor would we have been gathered here in worship today, and the thought which we entertain of the possibilities which its bosom may unfold, may the acquisition of this hill almost make the acquisition of this hill almost an epical accomplishment in the history of the church. The passages which I have quoted from the Book of Mormon and the more extended discussion of the subject by Elder B.H. Roberts, which was published in the Deseret News on March 3rd, definitely established the following facts. Fact number 1, that the hill Cumorah and the hill Ramah are identical. Fact number 2, that it was around this hill that the armies of both the Jaredites and Nephites fought their great and last battles. Fact number 3, that it was in this hill that Mormon deposited all the sacred records which had been entrusted to his care by Ammoron, except the abridgment which he had made from the plates of Nephi, which were delivered into the hands of his son Moroni. We know positively that it was in this hill that Moroni deposited the abridgment made by his father, and his own abridgment of the record of the Jaredites, and fact number 4, it was from this hill that Joseph Smith obtained possession of them. According to the Book of Mormon, many hundreds of thousands of people fell in battle around this hill and in the immediate vicinity. It was here that 2 once powerful nations were exterminated so far as their national existence was concerned. It was here that these nations gathered together for their last great struggles. All of these incidents of which I refer, my brethren and sisters, are very closely associated with this particular spot in the state of New York. Therefore, I feel, as I said in the beginning of my remarks, that the acquisition of that spot of ground is more than an incident in the history of the church. It is an epic which, in my opinion, is fraught with that which may become of great interest to the Latter-day Saints as that which has already been occurred. We know that all of these records, all the sacred records of the Nephite people, were deposited by Mormon in that hill. That incident alone is sufficient to make it sacred and hallowed spot that it is to us. I thank God that in a way which seems to have been providential, it has come into the possession of the church. And there's more on page 443. It talks about the Manchester, the state of New York, of North America. This is where the Book of Mormon happened. This is where the final battles took place. This is the hill of that place. And then Joseph Smith talked about that as well. This is from Lucy Mack Smith. She said that Joseph Smith talked about that as being the hill Cumorah in his day. And then on page 444, he talked about my impressions at the hill, at the Sacred Grove and the hill Cumorah by Elder Joseph Fielding Smith of the Council of the 12. It says, here it was that the hill Cumorah, commanded by the Lord, hid up the sacred records of his people. Here it was 1,400 years later that he, then a resurrected being, came to Joseph Smith and committed these same records to the young man's care. At the time of the prophet's first visit to the hill, it was covered with trees. Today it is stripped and bare, save for the grass which grows abundantly. This former scene of strife and bloodshed, where 2 nations, the Jaredites and the Nephites, perished. Later, the sacred repository of ancient records. Today is the abode of peaceful cattle, reclining and chewing the cud. The many millions of inhabitants of the land who, because of they love darkness rather than light, will not believe, although an angel had declared it unto them, appear to have no more thought concerning the wonderful events that have taken place near or on the hill Cumorah than have these cattle. And then in the back of the annotated Book of Mormon, we have again more information. Again, these are things that have probably been censored out. If you have been following what used to be farms and other organizations who have basically been set up to promote the Central American theories, they usually omit or they don't want people to know these statements. So that's why we put them in the annotated Book of Mormon here. On page 449, it says, where's the hill Ramah? Oliver Cowdery places the hill Ramah in western New York. The prophet Joseph Smith approves Oliver Cowdery's statements, this according to Joseph Fielding Smith. And then if you continue on in the very back of the book here, there are several pages here that has letter 7. So if you'd like to know more about letter 7, on page 512, 513, 514, and 515 are the actual statements and so forth from letter 7, Oliver Cowdery, along with maps and photos and so forth of the hill Cumorah. And then on page 516 is the final part of that. So there's 5 pages of information about that. This also has the Brigham Young quote that we talked about here as well. And then on pages 517, 518 are other quotes by Joseph Fielding Smith, Mark E. Peterson. You have James E. Talmage, George Albert Smith, Orson Pratt, and Ezra Taft Benson, all with direct quotes from historical sources that this is the hill Cumorah of the Book of Mormon. It can't be any clearer than that. Now, also on page 519 and 520, it has an awesome story about the Hill Cumorah monument. And so I wanted to, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the monument there and how it came to be, and a little bit about who was there and so forth?
Do you want me to back up and tell about acquiring the hill?
Yes. Because
should we do it in order?
Yes, let's do it in order. that makes the most sense to me. So go ahead. Okay. So tell us about how did we get the hill in the first place, and why would the church want this hill?
Yeah. So when Grandma and Grandpa got there, of course, that was one of the first things they wanted to see. And they went in their horse and buggy out to the hill, and they were met at gunpoint. No Mormon was going to go up that hill. So it was 5 years before they were actually able to walk on the hill. Wow. And then the church had also, again adding to his to-do list, they asked him to see if he could, arrange the purchases of church properties back there. So Grandpa was instrumental in acquiring the Peter Whitmer farm and the Martin Harris farm. And then the Hill Cumorah took quite a bit more effort. So let's go back to Pliny Sexton, the banker. He owned the hill. And so, in fact, my dad was named Alvin.
He really did own most of Palmyra, didn't he? Wow.
Yeah. And I don't want to minimize him. I've read more about him, and I think he was an amazing man, did a lot for the state. He was influential in expanding and improving education throughout the state of New York, and just so many things. But anyway, he owned the hill, and he was one of the people who had always been kind to the Beans. He never had any hostility toward them, and so he and Willard were pretty good friends. And but he was, like Willard said, he was a kindly old gentleman, but cold-hearted in business deals. So anyway, he was, not willing to sell, and it was.
So apparently, so Willard went and offered or wanted to buy.
Well,
I think
they talked. I think they talked about it. It was. I'm trying to think of his name now. C.W. Nibley was a counselor to President Grant, and so he came out with the intention of using his charm to persuade the banker to give them the farm, because it would mean so much to us. It was just a piece of land to him. It didn't work. He was very, very disappointed, and and Mr. Sexton said he'd be willing to sell for $100,000, and that was just the north end of the hill, which is where the monument is today.
Right.
And so that was just
it's
impossible.
More than the church could really.
Yeah, it was impossible. So
probably back in that time, it was several $1 million.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So they rode back, horse and buggy, back to the farm, and it was described as a very quiet ride all the way back. And finally, C.W. Nibley spoke up and said, "When the Lord wants us to have the hill, the way will open up." And it did. After Pliny Sexton died, the property fell into the hands of two nieces, and they passed away, and that just kind of seemed to be the chain reaction. They were passing away, and finally, distant relatives were just ready to get their piece of the pie. Let's sell this. So at this point, then, this is 1928, and the attorney for the estate called Willard and said, "I want you to come down to my office. Your opportunity to buy the hill has come." So he went right down there, and they negotiated, and in the end, they got the whole hill. According to my grandma, it was the entire hill, and now, I thought it was 3 farms. My grandma says 4 adjoining farms and a Grange Hall, which had the people who owned that couldn't were delinquent on their payments. So that was part of the deal then, that we got the Grange Hall, which made a meeting house for those saints, the few saints they had. And all for $53,000. That was still a lot of money in 1928, but a much better deal.
Just a little over half of what he had asked for years before.
And they got all of that included. Oh, wow. So that's how they got it. And so then Willard wrote a letter to the church and said, our opportunity is here to purchase the hill. I think he only put down $25. I think that's what he had to put to hold it. So anyway, he put down the money to hold it and sent this letter and all the details of everything. And a few days later, he got a letter from Salt Lake, from the brethren, saying, are we getting any closer to getting the hill? And see what you can do, see what you can negotiate, put down whatever you need to put down for it. And Willard had done every detail of what they were asking. Those letters were dated the same day and had crossed in the mail. So that's a fun.
So apparently, the church came up with the money, and the deal was done, and the church basically owned the property, and that was the end of that.
Yeah.
And that was actually the beginning of that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then they had a visitor center built. Well, right after that, not long after they got the hill, Willard contacted the church and said he would like to reforest the hill so it would look like it did when Joseph was there. Mm-hmm. Now, there's also an account from Oliver Cowdery we found recently that he said the hill was bare. But anyway, it did get reforested. So Willard contacted the National Forest Service, yeah. And they donated 65,000 evergreen trees, just little starts. 65,000 evergreen trees, and then they dug up 4,000 hardwood trees from around the edges of the sacred grove. So then, my dad was pretty little. He just observed the project. He was too little to help plant. But he said that they would just dig a hole. They got all the farm hands, Boy Scouts, whoever they could get to help, because they had to get them in the ground. And so he said they'd dig a hole, they'd put this sapling in, tamp it down with their feet, with their boots, and then they'd pray for rain, because there was no way to irrigate up there.
Yeah.
So, and a huge forest grew. And they had to clear it out when they started doing pageants. They had to clear out some of those trees, but
which you can kind of see here in this couple of images here. You can see the place where they cleared it out, right there. Mm-hmm. So those are all the trees that were there. This is looking from the one side there. Oh, there's back to Jonathan there. And so you can actually see that going on there. Yeah. So now it's fully treed now. It's pretty hard to tell. Yeah. That means that there's some really beautiful drone shots that we have of this. Yeah. It's some really gorgeous of all these different trees there.
So then it was 1920. So they purchased it in 1928. Then they also put a visitor center in, a small visitor center. Mm-hmm. But then in 1935, and I don't know how many years it took to get to the point of erecting the monument, but that occurred in 1935. Mm-hmm. And Topliff Canapus was the sculptor. And when he came out for the dedication, he had a conversation with my grandmother. And he told her how this all came about. When he heard that they were going to put a monument on the hill, and so he was in Salt Lake, he just got right to work sketching what he thought the monument would look like. And he came up with 7 sketches. And one night he took them up on Ensign Peak, which is just kind of behind the temple.
North of the temple and the Capitol building now.
Yeah. So he took them up to Ensign Peak in the dark of night and spread them all 7 sketches out on the ground. And then he knelt down to pray, and, I hope I'm not doing something wrong. But if this is okay, which one of these sketches is the right one for this sculpture? And when he opened his eyes, it was all lit up around there, and so you could see clearly every sketch. And he said, and then he saw a finger point to one. Wow. And the voice said, "This is the one." And it was the one that he also thought was the best. And then he's going, "Well, now what do I do? How do I present this to church authorities. What are they going to think?
The angel has showed me, or something. The Lord showed me.
So, and the spirit told him to just go to the church office building the next morning, and they would be waiting for him. So he did. With trepidation, he went, and they were there. They greeted him.
Showed
said,
up in the
"Come on
morning,
in. We've been waiting for you." Yeah, took him in. So he spread him out for them, and they also chose the same one.
Oh,
and
wow.
that's how he became involved.
That is such a cool story.
And when he was telling this to my grandma, and then so he finishes the story, and she said, "So, Brother Canappas, was it the angel Moroni that came to you?" And pointed to that one, and he said, "Sister Bean, that's my secret."
So no one still knows.
No one still
who
knows.
that was that pointed there. Oh, that is an awesome story. There's actually another interesting story that has to do with that. Once he finally got the approval from the church to make this monument, which you can see, you can actually see the flag there and so forth, and you see the monument going on there. And we got some pictures of the monument and so forth. You can get some close-ups of that. But basically, he needed to have a body double to sculpt from.
Right.
And so he found there's a guy that he knew as a friend of his. What was his name here? Elwyn Clark. Clark was he was a contractor. He was a bricklayer, and he basically just was really really muscular and built and everything. And he thought, man, he would be perfect for to be my body double, if you will, or your model basically for the monument. He says, but except for his face, because this guy's kind of young, he had kind of a youngish looking face. He said, I needed to have more of a face that looked more like Moroni. He was by this time he was kind of getting old and maybe had beard and that kind of stuff. And so he decided that he would use the body of Elwyn, but he needed to find somebody else for the face. So he, as he typically would do, he would kind of come down and walk through Salt Lake and kind of on the streets there and kind of just look at people and say, oh, did that look good and so forth. And he finally, he was walking down the street and he found this guy walking down the street, and he introduced himself and said, you know what, I'm doing this sculpture and so forth, and would you mind coming in to let me sculpt your face, because you have just the right face and so forth. So they go into the studio basically where he was at, and Elwyn was there. Elwyn Clark was there because he'd been sculpting him and his basically his muscles and that kind of stuff in his arms. And they looked at each other, and it was Elwyn Clark's father. Yeah. They picked just randomly off the street of Salt Lake and just moved there from Idaho. Basically, had just moved in and was just happened to be going down the street when he found him, when Topliff Canappas found him. And so they were just amazed that he picked out the father of the man who he was using as the model for the body of Moroni. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That is really cool.
By the way, if you want to know more details about that whole thing is actually on page 519 and 520 and 521 of talking about the Hill Cumorah, the statue, basically the monument up there. So we need to finish up here.
Do you want the little video?
Yes, we wanted to show this video here, basically, which has a little bit about a prophet that all of you probably will recognize, and we won't say his name right now, but this is a little bit about the experience there that happened at the monument there at Cumorah, at the dedication.
Yeah, and this is part of our DVD.
It's part of the Love Unfeigned DVD.
Right, yeah.
Okay, it's right there.
And I'll just point out before we watch it, one of the trumpeters married my Aunt Palmyra.
Oh, is that right?
So,
all right, let's go ahead and watch the video.
In July 1935, the Moroni Monument was unveiled. On that beautiful summer morning, a great crowd gathered at the hill, including a number of general authorities of the church. Among the crowd was a young missionary on his way home from England. His name was Gordon B. Hinckley. Of that great event, he said,
On the summit of the hill was a canvas-draped monument. At an appointed signal, 4 trumpeters raised their gleaming instruments. In sharp, clear tones, an angel from on high echoed across the placid countryside. The flag, the stars and stripes, fluttered in the wind, and it never looked more beautiful than it did over that hill, sacred and important to the history of America. Then the canvas shroud fell from the monument, and the figure of Moroni looked out across the quiet fields, which in his day of life had been scenes of carnage and sorrow. To a returning missionary, the picture of that summer day is unforgettable.
Okay, so we want to close here. Lori, you said you have a couple of special things that you would be willing to share with our podcast here, and so I'll let you go ahead and do that.
When I was just a little girl, I think I was probably just 4 or 5 years old, my grandmother gave me this little picture of Jesus. And I don't remember what she said when she gave it to me, but I remember how I felt. And that was that I knew that she really, really loved Jesus. And so I've had this all these years. And it reminds me of her, and it gives me courage and strength, and hope. So I thought I would share with you her most sacred experience on the farm, living back there. And a little bit of background on Rebecca. She was, her mother, they came from Denmark, and the missionaries came to her parents in Denmark, and they were converted. So Rebecca, and then they moved to the States, and so Rebecca loved hearing stories from her mother about the missionaries, all the missionaries that came to their home in Denmark, and she loved hearing stories about the prophet Joseph Smith. And she wished that she could live out in the world like her mother had, so she could have missionaries come to her home. Mm-hmm. And little did she know that that would happen for her. When they were on the farm, church authorities and missionaries just loved to go visit. She had visitors all the time, and she had to prepare beds for them to sleep in and cook meals for them and so on. And as time went on, and then we had pageants and more people were coming, she said that she served about an average of 300 visitors a month.
Wow.
Except for the coldest months of the year. Yeah, 300 a month.
Wow.
So talk about overwhelm. And so one day, she just really struggled to have, to get the meals done, and her baby was crying all day, and it was just a chaotic day. And by the end of the day, she was so worn out, and
was exhausted.
Yeah, she was. And so everyone had gone to bed, and her baby was asleep, and she thought, I'm just going to stay up a little longer and tidy up so my day will be a little easier tomorrow. And she said she was crying as she was cleaning up. And then she finally decided, okay, it's time to quit. She went to bed. She knelt down to say her prayers. She was still crying. She got into bed and was crying on her pillow when this dream or vision came to her. And she said she dreamed it was another day, and it was a beautiful day, and everything was going smoothly, and the kids were well behaved and playing, and she was able to get things done, and she had fixed breakfast for the guests, and then she was fixing lunch, and she called everyone in for lunch. And they were seated around the dining room table, and Brother Talmadge was there. He liked to visit the farm a lot. Mm-hmm. He was there. Anyway, so they sat down to eat, and then there was a knock at the door. And so she went and answered it, and there was a young man standing there, and she just assumed it was another missionary who had come to visit, because it happened all the time. So she invited him in. She said, you're here just in time for lunch, so come on in. And she had him sit next to Brother Talmadge, and she said, I'll go get you a plate. And she said it was so interesting because he and Brother Talmadge seemed to know each other. And they talked about the most amazing things. Some of them they couldn't even understand what they were talking about. And then when everyone was finished, Brother Talmadge called the missionaries and said, let's go outside and walk around these sacred grounds. So they left, and the children went out to play, and so my grandma was left alone with this young man. And he thanked her.
This is in the dream?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
And he thanked her for the for the meal and told her how wonderfully behaved her children were and so on, and how much he'd enjoyed being there. And then he said, it's time for me to go. So they were walking out into the hall. When he had come in, he put some pamphlets on the table inside the door. So they're walking out, and she turned for a moment and picked up those pamphlets. And when she turned back, it was the Savior who stood before her. And he was in his glory. And she said he looked at her with the kindest face that she had ever seen, and lovingly put his hands on her shoulders and looked into her eyes and said, Sister Bean, this day hasn't been too hard for you, has it? And she said, oh no, I have been so happy in all my work, and everything has gone so well. And he said, I promise you, if you will go about your work every day as you have done it this day, you will be equal to it. And then he said, remember, these missionaries represent me on this earth, and all that you do unto them, you do unto me. And then he said, were walking toward the door and stepped out onto the porch, and he said, I have far to go, so I must be on my way. And then he said again, remember, these missionaries represent me on this earth, and all that you do unto them, you do unto me. And then he started to go upward. And she said the roof of the porch was no obstruction for him to go through or for her to see through. And he went up and up and up, and she marveled at how she could still see him so far away. And then all of a sudden he disappeared, and she was crying on her pillow like she was when she went to bed. But she said after that experience, never again was there any frustration in her soul. Never again were there too many beds to make or mouths to feed. And the love that she had for the missionaries before that just multiplied. And she said we felt the influence of the Savior and the influence of the prophet Joseph Smith all the days we lived there. And she said, her dream had come true. She had more missionaries come to her home than any woman in the church. When I was older and I learned, heard her speak and learned that story, then I knew that this was a very special gift that she had given me. And then, so people say, was it a dream or was it a vision? When she was looking at
Native
final
Americans,
letters.
Native Americans don't differentiate between the two.
True.
And Lehi had a dream, which was also a vision.
Right.
Yeah.
But she wrote a letter to her children in 1953. She died in 1976. But she wrote a letter in 1953 and sealed it and gave it to my Aunt Palmyra and said, don't open this until I die.
Oh, wow.
So I was there. My parents and I drove up to Salt Lake. I grew up in Southern California. So we drove up, and we got there in the afternoon. But that morning, Palmyra had opened the letter, and then she handed it to my dad to read. So I'm going to share it with you. So these were her...
I'm going to try to share it with us.
Right. Grandma said, when you tell these stories, you must not get emotional. You cannot cry when you tell these stories.
Good luck with that.
Anyway, this is a letter written to her children. She said, my dearest children, when you read this, I will be gone. But there must be no sorrow. Death has to come as well as birth. I hope my love and my influence will be round about you as long as you live. Remember always, this life is only a preparation for the life to come, so live it well and be proud of your heritage. Gain a strong testimony of the gospel, and do not fail to get your temple work done. I have loved you deeply with the love that only mothers know. I haven't much to leave you except my love and a testimony that is humble and sincere. The prophet Joseph is as real to me as any living person I have ever known. And there will be a friendship deep between us, few earthly friends have known. My testimony of the Savior is sacred and glorious, for I have seen him, heard his voice, and felt the touch of his hand. Life has been good to me, better than I have ever deserved. Be kind and helpful to each other and love one another as I have loved you. Until we meet again. My love everlasting, your devoted mother. So that's a treasure. She left.
Really special.
She left to us far more than any physical thing could have been valued. And then I wanted to share also. I consider this kind of Willard's last words. Let's see. It's in here. Okay. So this is a combination of my last words, Willard's last words, my dad's last words.
Okay.
We'll kind of mix them up here in the interest of time. But I have created a list of what I consider to be Palmyra's legacy, and not just to me, and not just to my family, but to the entire church and to the entire world. This is the legacy we get from Palmyra. And it began with a Latter-day Prophet, Joseph Smith, who at the age of 14 had faith and courage to follow that scripture in the New Testament, yep, to ask of God. And he went into a grove of trees to pray, to know how he stood before God, and because he was seeking truth. And from that, we've got the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Just as it was organized in Christ's day, it has been restored in our day. And the Book of Mormon, which is a second testament of Jesus Christ. And then a return to where it all began, and that was the mission of Willard and Rebecca Bean. The next piece of the legacy is a change of heart. In 1939, the 24-year missionary assignment of Willard and Rebecca was complete. They arrived in Palmyra as newlyweds and returned home as grandparents. And by now the tide had turned, and when the townspeople learned that they were leaving, they were devastated. They said, "Your church is making a big mistake. You can't leave." The Lions Club honored the Beans with a formal banquet and entertainment. The master of ceremonies paid them this glowing compliment. "We are doing honor to a family that came to Palmyra some years ago. When they settled on the Joseph Smith farm, some of our super pious citizens started a tirade with the object of getting rid of them. But as they proved themselves good citizens, we soon learned to tolerate them. Then we learned to admire and respect them, and now we love them. It is with reluctance that we now bid farewell to the most versatile family that ever lived in Wayne County." And villagers and country folk said, "We are not all members of civic organizations, but we are all friends to the Bean family." Then the next piece is a temple. In 2000, the 100th temple in the church was dedicated, and my dad and my Aunt Palmyra, they were the only two left alive, and they were invited by the First Presidency to attend that temple dedication, and they each took their two daughters. So yeah, Palmyra took her two daughters, my dad took Vicki and me. We went back and we were in the Celestial Room for that dedication, and this is the session we were in is not the one that was broadcast.
One previous to that.
That was the first one of the day, and then ours was I can't remember. I think ours was the second or third session that was done. Mm-hmm. But President Hinckley got up and first he came back and introduced himself, like we didn't know who he was. Shook their hands, and then he gave a really beautiful tribute to Willard and his missionary service that led to having a temple there today. Wow. So that was a wonderful thing to get to experience. And then the next part of another piece of Palmyra's legacy is testimony. And people often asked my dad, "It must have been easy for you to gain a testimony there." And he said, and his response is, "Yes, it was." And I'll just read you a few points from the testimony that he left us. And he says, "I consider it a privilege to have been born in the home where the prophet Joseph Smith lived and where heavenly beings appeared. to be born to missionary parents who testified of the events that took place there and of the restored gospel and the eternal salvation of man. For 20 years I lived and played and worked on holy ground, on ground where God and his Son and angels had appeared to speak to mortals. People always ask me if it was easy to gain a testimony in those conditions, and my response is always, yes, it was easy. I walked through the sacred grove literally thousands of times. I climbed the hill Cumorah hundreds of times, the same hill the prophet climbed many times. Many marvelous and wondrous things have happened in the community around Palmyra, things that have changed history and the lives of millions and millions of people. I'm proud to have been a part of that history for even a brief few years. And then, where's my page? Okay. And then the next piece of Palmyra's legacy is extraordinary faith and courage, which kind of goes back to our opening from the scriptures in Moroni. Yep. And so I'll share with you a couple paragraphs from Willard's autobiography that kind of sums up his mission. He said, I always feel reluctant about relating or writing my own experiences, lest it be interpreted as boastful. And yet, on the other hand, when others tell my experiences, they only get it about half right. But if I accomplished anything worthwhile during my sojourn in New York, it is only another evidence that the Lord can yet use the weak and foolish things of the world to accomplish his purposes, and I pass the credit and praise on to him whom it belongs. I was not there to get rich in this world's goods, but to break down prejudice and make friends for Joseph Smith and the Mormon Church. When attacked, I fought back fearlessly and courageously, pulling no punches. And then when my opponent, in debate or the squared ring, took the count or acknowledged defeat, I would take him by the hand and make a friend of him. I am one of the common people, the common herd, but am not a stranger to the Bible, and with the Lord's help can defend the gospel against our maligners. And
That's
finally,
awesome.
Yeah, and finally, the last of Palmyra's legacy on my list is The Power of Love Unfeigned. And I think this is probably the most important. This is what helped them endure being there and making converts and starting a branch there.
Changing the heart of the people there. The whole community.
Breaking down the prejudice. And so I use the scripture from Matthew. Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And that's where their success came from. Yeah. And then President Hinckley, just a couple of months before Willard passed away, which was in 1949. This article that Elder Hinckley had written a few years before was republished in the Deseret News, and he ended that article by saying, "No man in the church has won more friends for the cause of the Lord than Willard Bean."
That's very cool.
Yeah. So,
wow.
There's some testimonies to wrap it up. When we're engaged in the Lord's work, the veil is very thin, and we do have access to heavenly help always.
Angels, just like Moroni was talking about here in the final chapters of the Book of Mormon here, when he basically is saying there at toward the very end here. Let me see here that part, and we're going to get into this next week. We talk about chapter 10 and the promise and so forth. But this is I love the part he basically says that he whatsoever thing ye shall ask my Father in my name, which is good in faith, believing that ye shall receive, behold, it shall be done unto you. And I think that is apropos to your grandfather, that he went forth in faith and believing that he could actually do that. It took 5 years before it started to happen, and by the time 24 years was over, he'd seen that the entire transition from that. Mm-hmm. And it was through his faith and his hope and his charity, mm-hmm. which is what Moroni is talking about here in chapter 7 specifically, that basically gave him that opportunity to see those miracles happen in his life. So we want to thank you so much for coming and sharing that wonderful information. I know this has been kind of a long one. I understand that, but
much more.
I know there's so much more. So let me just very quickly kind of go over some things if you would like to learn more about all of this. Of course, the first place I would recommend is if you already have the Attitude of Book of Mormon. Many of these stories and so forth are in here about the Hill Cumorah. We didn't even read a lot of the different apostles and so forth accounts of the Hill Cumorah being that. We want to this. Many of you also probably have this book, the Exploring the Book of Mormon in America's Heartland. We do talk about the Hill Cumorah in some detail there as well, and there's some really beautiful pictures of the monument and things up there, and just the hill itself. We have the DVD that's is here somewhere. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. The Hill Cumorah, verifications and realistic archaeological expectations. If you want to see the most beautiful footage of that and so forth. And you said you don't have this, I don't think so.
No, I don't have.
This is now yours.
Thank you.
Okay. Then also, if you want to know a little bit more about the ancient history of New York, we have the Aboriginal Monuments of New York by E.G. Squire, which we just talked about with Steve Smoot just a couple of weeks ago. If you're following these podcasts, just some awesome information about everything from the archaeological evidences of that. We want to again remind you about the book. This is a reprint from the original. Lori here has the original one here, but this is the Geography of the Book of Mormon, original one. This is the new version basically of it here, the Book of Mormon Geography and Church of Rama Cumorah, and those you can get off of our website. You can't get these anymore.
No, I have some of these too.
Yeah. So you can get those. We want to recommend also Love Unfeigned. And that's a fantastic. Where can they get these?
They just have to email me.
And then this is also awesome.
Also that one.
Willard Bean, Parson. I think we have these also on our bookstore as well, so we can you can get them from there as well. Okay. So that's Willard Bean Fighting Parson, and those are fantastic here. Last but not least, we have Letter 7. If you don't have this already, this is absolutely phenomenal. This is from Jonathan Neville. He did the research on this, but it's actually technically it's from Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith, and their letter to the world about the Hill Cumorah. So this has excerpts from the Hill Cumorah and so forth, and these letter 7. Also, I just want to make a little bit more information if you want to go into the church history and so forth about the gold plates. There's Jonathan Neville's book, Whatever Happened to the Golden Plates. This talks about the Hill Cumorah, why this repository of records in the Hill Cumorah is such an important aspect, and some historical information that actually supports the understanding that there is that the records of the Nephites were there at the Hill Cumorah, at least just during Joseph Smith's time frame. Where did the small plates of Nephi come from? That when we lost the 116 pages, when that was lost and so forth. Fantastic information. Most people don't realize that there was actually 2 sets of plates that we get the Book of Mormon from. So we get these plates here, which is the main set of plates, but there's also the small plates of Nephi, which were not actually part of the original plates. And that's all explained in this book. Again, Whatever Happened to the Gold Plates. You have Moroni's America, which is Jonathan Neville's information about the geography part of this. This all plays totally into the Hill Cumorah. That the Hill Cumorah in New York is the one in the Book of Mormon. It fits perfectly in the geography of the Book of Mormon. Once you understand the geography, it makes it a lot better, and then you can actually see that there's no reason to try to imagine or make believe that there's 2 Hill Cumorahs. There's just one, and it's right there in Palmyra. They also have the Lost City of Zarahemla, which describes if you haven't seen this already, this is awesome. This has to do with how did we get the idea that the Book of Mormon happened down in Central America anyway? And it turns out through massive historical documentation and so forth, here Jonathan Neville has uncovered that actually it came from 3 people who ended up becoming all apostates. Yeah. There was Benjamin Winchester and John Page and who was the other one? I can't remember now. Anyway, but the 3 of them basically began to promote the Central American ideas, which were then into the community with the RLDS Church, which became the Community of Christ, and then some of their historians started to push the Central American theory because you know why? This is interesting. You'll love this. You may not know this, but why is it that the RLDS Church began promoting the Central American theory?
I don't know.
Because when Willard Bean was successful of having our church buy the Hill Cumorah, they wanted to say, well, see, that church, that Salt Lake church there, a bunch of knuckleheads, they bought the wrong hill.
Oh, really?
And so they didn't want to admit that was the actual Hill Cumorah and that the church had actually purchased that. And so they actually basically started to promote the idea that the church made a big mistake. They bought the wrong hill. The real hill is down in Central America. And so it made us look like we had egg on our face, supposedly. I don't know if you knew that or not, but that's a pretty interesting aspect. But that's all in this book. It's called The Lost City of Zarahemla by Jonathan Neville. And then also don't want to forget Wayne May's book, This Land, Willard's Cumorah Land. Again, all of these are available pretty much on the bookstore at bookofmormonevidence.org. We want to thank you for joining us, everybody. This has been kind of a long one, but I hope that this has been real informative. I've wanted to have this conversation and this interview with you for a long time. And we've cleared up a lot of things. We've got clarification in the actual hill and so forth. And I just want to thank you and your family, and we want to honor your grandfather and his posterity for the wonderful things that they've accomplished. So, thank you very much, Lori.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, join us next week. We're getting down to the end of these Come Follow Me podcasts for this year. And so join us here. We have just another couple of podcasts, and I think you're going to really enjoy our Christmas special as well. So join us and give us the thumbs up if you like this information. Share it with everybody that you know that could use this information, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Lori, for spending time with us to preserve church and family history in such a beautiful way.
To me, this is not just another nation. It is not just one of the family of nations. This is a nation with a great mission to perform for the benefit of liberty-loving people everywhere. It is my firm conviction that the Constitution of this land was established by men whom the God of heaven raised up unto that very purpose. This is part of my religious faith.
Looking forward to 2021, you can buy your annotated Book of Mormons for Christmas gifts and save 21% at bookofmormonevidence.org.